The secrecy surrounding the sexual exploitation of black male slaves by their white female owners persists today. While white supremacists aimed to bring attention to the exploitation of black women, they also wanted to conceal how white women used their black male slaves for sexual gratification. These women would discreetly bring black male slaves into their homes, hiding their actions from their husbands. If this became widely known, it would undermine the white supremacists' authority and challenge the loyalty of their wives, leading to embarrassment. However, the exploitation didn't stop at sexual abuse. It reached even further, as you'll discover in this video. Let's begin exploring the black history. Despite societal expectations of femininity, white women in the upper class wielded significant power during slavery. They actively maintained and perpetuated the institution, holding authority over slaves, especially black men. It's important to note that in the American South before the Civil War, white women couldn't vote or hold office. When they married, their property technically belonged to their husbands. However, they shared a significant ability with white men. They could buy, sell, and own enslaved people. In her book White Women as Slave Owners in the American South, historian Stephanie Jones Rogers argues that white women were far from passive bystanders in slavery. Contrary to previous narratives, they actively participated, strengthening their economic power through slave ownership. Jones Rogers conducted her research using a unique source: interviews with formerly enslaved people from the Great Depression era, gathered by the Federal Writers Project. These interviews revealed that white girls were often raised to be slave owners. They received training and discipline from a young age, with slaveholding parents and family members gifting them black slaves on occasions like Christmas or milestone birthdays. There are even accounts of white female infants being given enslaved people as their own property. One notable instance is recorded in court documents, where a woman recounts how her grandfather gave her a black slave when she was just 9 months old. It's puzzling to imagine how a child could grasp the concept of owning a slave without being taught. Clearly, she was raised with the notion that she had authority over another human being as her property. This early teaching led these children to grow up without seeing black slaves as equals. Such upbringing played a significant role in fostering deeply racist and supremacist attitudes within society. One of the most troubling aspects of the abuse suffered by black male slaves at the hands of wealthy white women was sexual exploitation. While the common story often portrays white women as passive or innocent, there were occasions where they actively participated in non-consensual sexual relationships and rape. They used their power and control over black male slaves to engage in such acts, perpetuating a cycle of sexual violence and degradation. This further stripped away the humanity of those who were already enslaved. One example of such instances can be found in the autobiography Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl by Harriet Jacobs. Jacobs herself, a former slave, described how daughters of plantation owners would exploit male slaves. It's possible that the fathers and male relatives of white girls didn't realize that giving them black male slaves would result in the same kind of exploitative behavior they themselves engaged in. In simpler terms, while white men were raping and exploiting black women, could elite white women also abuse black male slaves? Both forms of sexual exploitation were cruel, wrong, and continue to haunt us. White men took pride in raping black women, but they couldn't be proud knowing that their white wives, daughters, and sisters were having sexual relationships with black male slaves. It's important to note that these relationships weren't consensual. Black male slaves were forced to do whatever they were told, or else they faced brutal beatings or even death. So, being sexually exploited seemed like a better option than being killed. Harriet Jacobs wrote in her book that she saw a master whose reputation suffered because his daughter chose one of the most abused male slaves on his plantation to be the father of her first grandchild. It's important to note that the daughter didn't choose a white man or her father's more intelligent servants. Instead, she picked the most mistreated black male slave, over whom she could exert authority with less fear of being exposed. This relationship clearly shows predatory behavior and can hardly be seen as consensual. In fact, it's a form of sexual abuse, if not outright rape. Just like their male counterparts, mistresses and elite women were able to control and abuse their black slaves sexually. Planter class white women used another method to control slaves sexually. They would threaten to accuse them of rape or attempted rape if they refused to have sex. This tactic played on the idea that slaves were weak and needed protection from white men. It allowed white women to control black male slaves and assert their dominance over them. The reasons for this behavior varied. Some women may have done it out of boredom or sexual frustration, while others may have done it unconsciously to make up for their lack of power in other parts of their lives. White women in the planner class were essentially controlled by their husbands and had limited control over their own sexuality compared to men. Exploiting slaves may have given them a sense of power and control that they couldn't get elsewhere. Here's a reminder to support us so we can make more videos for you. Please subscribe to our channel and give the video a like. We're trying to build a strong community and we need your support. Let's continue now. This analysis doesn't excuse the actions of sexually abusing white women. It also doesn't suggest that female sexual abuse of black slave men wouldn't have happened if women had higher status in society. However, just as white women who owned slaves often took out their frustrations on slaves by being excessively cruel and violent, they likely used sex as another way to dominate and control in a society where they had little power. These women's lives were very restricted. They had limited freedom and couldn't move around freely. They weren't allowed to travel without a male chaperone, and husbands often used abuse to control their wives during the antebellum era. Many women on plantations were unhappy because they couldn't do what they wanted. They were supposed to be obedient, pleasant, and cheerful, even though their husbands were having affairs with or hurting black women who were slaves. This made them feel alone and weak, like they were trapped in a society that said it was better, but often made them sad. But it wasn't just sexual abuse that was a problem. There was also physical abuse, which could be really terrible. It happened everywhere, from small farms to big plantations, in cities and in the countryside, even in factories and on trains. Both black and white people lived together, but their relationships were different. Surprisingly, it wasn't just white men who hurt black slaves. White women did it too. They did things like hitting and whipping them, leaving them with scars that wouldn't go away, both on their bodies and in their minds. There's a really scary story about a woman named Madame Marie Delphine Lalaurie who lived in New Orleans in the 1800s. She was really cruel to her black male slaves. She did awful things to them, like gouging out their eyes and punching holes in their skulls. She even let maggots crawl into their wounds. On April 10th, 1834, there was a fire at a house. When her neighbors tried to help, they noticed something strange. Madame Lalaurie was saving her stuff instead of her slaves, which was really unusual back then. When people asked about her slaves, she just told them to mind their own business. Some folks thought her behavior was suspicious, and others said they heard strange noises coming from her attic, so they decided to check it out. When they opened the attic door, they found something awful, a room full of torture devices and terrible smells. It was a scene that was hard to even talk about. Inside, there were piles of dead bodies, mostly black men who were slaves. Their organs and limbs were cut off. Some were tied to tables, and others were trapped in small cages with spikes, so they couldn't move their heads. Some had their eyes taken out, their fingernails ripped off, and their ears hanging by bits of skin. Their mouths were filled with poop and sewn shut. Some victims had their skin peeled off in spirals to look like caterpillars, their bones broken and rearranged to look like crabs, and their intestines pulled out and tied around their waists. When people found this awful place, they knew the stories about Lalaurie's missing slaves were true. Before this, people already thought something was wrong with her. A lawyer had visited her mansion and saw a terrible thing: a 12-year-old slave girl died trying to escape from Madame Lalaurie's whipping. When her mansion caught fire, people saw the truth about how she treated her black slaves. She used to enjoy hurting black slaves, mostly black men, by peeling their skin and removing their organs. Did you ever hear about the secret relationships between rich white women who owned slaves and black male slaves? Share your thoughts in the comments. If you want more videos like this, please subscribe to our channel, where you can find more videos. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe and turn on the notification bell to get notified anytime we post a new video. God bless you. Amen.